Yeah, thank you very much.
So I would like to thank the organizer to give me this opportunity to speak about this subject. I want to mention that this is kind of a sequel to Nori's talk because I will present a formula for delta z decay for all d and k. So delta z decay is following the notation Nori introduced, but I will re-explain it. This is joint work with Antoine Deza. And the overall problem is linear optimization. So you probably all know what linear optimization is, but I made the slides. It's the introductory slide about it. So what it means is that you have a polyhedron in Euclidean space R to the D, and you want to find a point X that inside the polyhedron that maximize this linear functional C dot X. And the polyhedron is very often set up as a system of linear inequalities. So you have n linear inequalities, n scalar inequalities, and you can write it as a matrix inequality like this, where the matrix has n lines and d columns that correspond to the coordinates. So here I have an example on this slide. This is a special kind of a polyhedron. It's a polytop because it's bounded. And my vector C is pointing downward, which means that the optimal point X is the point that is at the bottom of the polytop. It's X star here. And so just to give a general question about linear optimization, the mostly unsolved general question, it's what is the complexity of linear programming? And there's a problem that was mentioned earlier this week. It's Mail's ninth problem that asks whether linear programming can be solved with a strongly polynomial algorithm, which means that both the number of steps of the algorithm has to be polynomial in the size of the problem and the amount of memory you need to perform the algorithm. But what kind of algorithm do we know to solve linear optimization? I will just speak about two kinds. And actually, the talk is about the first kind, but I want to mention the other kind because there was a recent breakthrough on this one. So the first kind is pivoting algorithms, and it goes like this. You take a vertex of your polyhedron, x0, and then you look at the neighboring vertices in the graph of the polytop, meaning the vertices that are linked to x0 by an edge of the polytop. And if you're not already optimal, then you can find the vertex x1 where the objective function c dot x is greater than at x0, and then you move to this vertex and you repeat this until you reach x star. This is what I call a pivoting algorithm. A pivot here is the move from one vertex to the next. And so, as Nori told, this amounts to draw a path in the graph of the polyhedron. And a question is, if you have a graph with a large diameter, then the path may be long. So the diameter of the graph of a polyhedron tells us something about the complexity of pivoting algorithms. So here, some results are known about the diameter of this graph. So here, you look at the largest possible diameter of the graph of a polyhedron with n facets. And recall that n is also the number of inequalities in the description of the polyhedron I gave in the previous slide, the number of rows of the matrix. And the dimensions, these are the two relevant parameters that tell about the size of the problem. So it's the size of the matrix A. So if you fix those two parameters, d and n, and ask for how large the diameter of the graph of a polyhedron with n facets and and dimension d can be, then some things are known. The upper bound here is has a long story. So it was obtained by Kalaik-Leitman, as Nori told, but this particular version is an improvement obtained by Nori. And in between, I put 3 dots because there were a lot of steps to improve the original Kalaik-Leitman bound to the Tsukegawa one. And the lower bound tells us that the largest possible diameter of polytope with n facets and dimension d can be larger than n minus d. Still linear, but larger than n minus d. It's Santos' famous result. So these are the usual way to quantify, I would say, the diameters of polyhedra. But now let me just say one thing about another algorithm that we can use to solve linear optimization. It's the interior point method. It was recently proven that a large class of interior point methods are not strongly polynomial. So in the Smales spirit, by Alamijon, Benchimol, Gobert, and Josvig. So now, this set of 2 parameters, so back to pivoting algorithm, this set of parameters tells something about the size of the problem. It's the size of the matrix A, tells something about the size of the problem. But in fact, there are other ways to understand the size of the problem here. And the setup we're interested in this talk, and Nori presented it earlier, is another set of parameters. So there is still the dimension d, but instead of n, we will use k. The parameter k you already spoke about, because it's another way to tell your feasible domain is contained in a hypercube. So this set is bounded like this by the size of the hypercube, if you will, and its dimension. So lattice polytopes. And on the way, I didn't want to disturb earlier, but on the way, I will be able probably to give you some intuition about some questions that were asked during Nori's talk, I hope. You will tell me. I may not be able to answer questions better than him, but okay, because it's online, it's always more difficult. Okay. So a lattice polytope, it's just a polytope whose vertices belong to the integer grid. Here, z to the d, where the ambient space is the d-dimensional space. Here on the right, you have an example. In the case d equal 2, you have a lattice polygon. And instead of n, we fix an integer k and study the lattice polytopes contained in the hypercube of edge length k. So 0k to the d. It's not any hypercube. It's a hypercube whose edges are parallel to the axis of the space, of the ambient space. And we want to study the polytopes that are inside this hypercube. And I think this polygon was shown by Nori already. It's k equals 4, and it's one that maximizes the diameter. And our question, now we have two different parameters, k and d, is what is the largest possible diameter of a lattice polytope contained in the hypercube 0k to the d. And this largest diameter, we will denote it delta dk. So we use a small delta instead of a big delta for the setup where you have d and n. And quite a few things are known about this diameter. It was observed by Nadev that delta d1 is equal to d. And it was later improved by Kleinschmidton to delta decays, well, improved, it's an upper bound. The Kleitsch method result is an upper bound. They prove that it's at most k times d. This introduced the parameter k. And in dimension 2, it's sort of unrelated at first when you see the result, because these are results about the number of vertices of a lattice polygon contained in a square. But since the number of lattice polygon contained in a square is basically twice the diameter of the graph of the polygon, because it's a cycle, then you get the diameter on the diameter of the graph of the polygon, which is this one. So Nori mentioned it already. And here, if you look closely, you get you have zeta of 2 here. I'm
sorry. Yeah, there is someone who is not muted. I guess we are going to do that.
okay.
Another.
Oh yeah. I see.
Another. Daniel, there was another one. Yes.
So I'm not muted, and I have a daughter who's sleeping next, so maybe she will cry at some point. I hope not.
Okay. Now it's good. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. So and if you look closely at this constant, you can see that the number Nori mentioned, zeta of 2, appears here. It's not completely clear yet, but we saw it in Nori's talk. And actually, recently, Delpy and Michini observed that this Klein-Schmidt-On bound can be improved when k is larger than or equal to 2. And they removed d over 2 to this k times d bound. So when k is equal to 2, this is sharp. When k is equal to 2, they also proved that delta d2 is always equal to the floor function of 3d over 2. Okay, so this is known, and for k equals 3, we know things, but we don't know the exact value of delta d3. With Antoine, we improved the upper bound of Delpy and Michini to this by removing another d over 6 and term k minus 3. But and interestingly, this gives the value for one entry in the table of delta dk. So this is sort of sharp, but only for one value, and not for the whole column. So that's why it's difficult to improve, because it's already sharp for one value. So if you want to do better, you have to assume something else than just k is larger than or equal to 3, and the proof is already sort of complicated. So yeah. And now let me mention one thing about these results. They are mostly upper bounds. So the Klein-Schmidt-On result is an upper bound. The Delpy-Michini and the Antoine myself results are upper bounds. So one natural question is, what about lower bounds? But before I speak about lower bounds, I give this summary table. It's the same as Nori, I think. Maybe there's one value more, it's the 10 here. These are the known values of delta dk, all of them. And Nori was right. When k equals 3 and d equals 6, we don't know the right value. I think there are two or three numbers that are possible here, because we have upper bounds and lower bounds. So the first row is the Aketa, Zunich, and Tiller result. The first column is Nadev. The second column is Delpy-Michini. The 6 here, it's mentioned in one of these papers. I don't remember which. The 8 is the one we got with Antoine with our upper bound, with our refined upper bound, the only value we got. The 10 and the 7, 9, 10 here were obtained computationally, and you have to work a lot to do that, because the number of lattice polytopes already in dimension 3 and with k equals 3 is large, and we can compute it. Okay, but let me come back to the observation that we have mostly upper bound so far. Actually, there is a lower bound. It was obtained by Dezamanoussakis and Hahn. And so Nori mentioned it as well. It's this lower bound, k plus 1, d over 2, and it's valid only when k is less than 2d. So if you fix d and want to have a large value of k, then you don't have an upper bound. But this lower, you don't have a lower bound, sorry. But this lower bound is interesting for several reasons. And I will, I want to, because this is a key part in the talk, I want to tell you why. And I hope I will at least informally answer one of the questions that was posed during Nori's talk. This lower bound was obtained by Deza Manoussakis and on using a family of zonotopes. So these are polytopes, but these are particular polytopes that are Minkowski sums of line segments. So let me recall this. So here in this picture, I consider 4 orange line segments. I will always consider them attached on one end to the origin and on the other end to some lattice point in the integer grid. So it can be done without loss of generality, because if you translate your line segment, then the resulting zonotope will be translated as well. So it's the same polytope up to translation. These segments, I will call them the generators of the zonotope. And if you take their Minkowski sum, then you get a zonotope. So here it's an octagon. And you can see that the line segment can be seen here because they are they are up to translation the edges of this octagon. And most of the time, I will identify the line segment with the vector that connects the origin to a lattice point. So the origin is the start of the vector, and the end point, the extremity of the vector, is some point in the grid. So there was this question: what happens in dimension more than 2? Here is an example of what happens in dimension more than 2. So it's a 3-dimensional example. In dimension 4, it gets complicated to draw, but in dimension 3, this is a zonotope. This is an example of a zonotope, and I use it to illustrate 2 key properties of zonotopes. The first property is that the diameter of the zonotope is the number of its generators, meaning the number of the line segments you started with. 2 of these line segments have to be non-collinear, of course, because otherwise they would merge in a single segment. And this diameter, so here I draw a zonotope with 6 generators. So these are the line segments here. And you can see that you can get a diameter by starting from the origin and picking the generators in some order. There's an order which stays on the boundary of the zonotope. So of course, there are lots of orders. If I start with, for example, if I start with edge 3 here, then I will go inside the zonotope. But if I start with edge 1, it's okay. Okay, so, and you can see that if you do that, you start from the origin and you end up at the opposite point of the zonotope, which is which defines actually the hypercube, the smallest hypercube in which you can put your zonotope. So you have 2 properties. The first one is that the diameter of the zonotope is the number of generators. And the second one is that the smallest hypercube in which you can put your zonotope up to translation is also the largest coordinate of the sum of the generators. So here in this one it's completely symmetric. So the sum of the generators are all equal, and you can pick this number for the size of the hypercube. So for the size of the hypercube, I mean k. The value of k. So if you look at these 2 properties, then you can restate the question of computing the diameter of a lattice polytope in terms of a packing problem. And I will explain you why. So there is a conjecture in between. I want to be clear about that too. So in fact, another reason why this construction and this lower bound is very interesting is that because with it, Deza-Manousakis and On give a conjecture which tells that delta decay is always achieved by a zonotope, meaning that delta decay is also the largest possible diameter of a lattice zonotope contained in the hypercube 0k to the d. So in this sense, if you can compute the delta z decay, conjecturally, you get the largest possible diameters for all d and k for every zonotope. So of course, this conjecture is not proven. It's probably very difficult to prove. Well, we tried. We didn't succeed yet. Maybe somebody has a great idea and solve it, but it would be great. So now the focus, thanks to this conjecture, the focus shifts a little bit towards computing delta z decay. And as Nori said already, we have a number of results about delta z decay, and the main results I want to advertise in this talk is the fact that delta z decay, there is a formula for it, which might look surprising considering this conjecture. There would be, if the conjecture is true, a formula for delta decay itself. Okay, but let me explain what packing problem we can put the computation of delta z decay into. Actually, it's very simple. You want to select the generators of your zonotope, and you want to select as many as possible in under the constraint that the sum of the generators has, for its largest coordinate, something that is smaller than k. So it's a packing problem, a sort of a knapsack problem, but but the objects are vectors from ZD, so it's a knapsack problem in the integer lattice. If you think for 30 seconds, you can see already that you can remove some vectors from ZD as possible candidates, because if you take a vector that is not primitive, and by primitive I mean whose coordinates are relatively prime. If your vector is not primitive, for example, this red point is twice this black point, then you can replace this generator by a shorter generator, and you're still in the same hypercube because you shorten the generator. So you can say, let's play at this packing problem with primitive vectors instead of any vectors. And the other thing you can do is to say, I don't want a generator and its opposite, because they would be collinear. So I can allow myself to only consider half of the primitive vectors in the integer lattice. So, and in order to normalize this, I will say we want only the primitive vectors whose first non-zero coordinate is positive. So it just eliminates half of the primitive vectors. And among these candidates, there is no longer any two of them that are collinear. So in this set of primitive vectors, how many can we select under the constraint that the largest coordinate of the sum is at most k? And the largest coordinate of the sum, I will call it kappa through in the following. That's just a packing problem, as there are many, but it's an interesting packing problem, and I want to convince you of that. But first, let me come back to what Nori presented. So there's this Stiller and Aketa-Zunich result that tells that delta 2k behaves asymptotically as k to the 2/3 times this constant, which is explicit. And together with Antoine and Nori, we proved that this can be generalized to any dimension, provided that you use delta z instead of delta. So in higher dimension, in some way, the zonotopes are the right generalization of the polygons, actually for this theorem. But it's not only for this theorem. So it's not the topic of the talk, but surprisingly, zonotopes are a good model for polytopes, which comes as something surprising because zonotopes are very structured, and as you know, polytopes are not. So this is this is exactly the generalization. If you take d equals 2 in this equation, then you get the Aketa-Zunis-Gentile result. And actually, in the course of proving that, in our paper with Antoine and Nori, we have an intermediate result, which is this theorem, and which turns out to be particularly interesting if you like to count lattice points inside of polytopes. And there is a whole sport of it. It's called the Erhard theory. It's very interesting. But let me introduce this theorem. It's basically almost only an observation. So in fact, it turns out that we can characterize exactly the value of delta z dk for some particular values of k, which I call k kappa p here. I will tell you what it is. So if you take the ball for the L1 norm, so the ball for the L1 norm is a cross polytope. Here in 2 dimension, it's just a square. If you take the ball for the L1 norm centered at the origin and of radius p, so in the picture here, p is equal to 2, okay? If you take this ball and look at all the primitive points contained in this ball, whose first non-zero coordinate is positive, of course, you remove the points that are in the gray part, and you build the zonotope out of this set of primitive vectors, then we know that delta z dk is equal to the number of these points, where kappa p is the largest coordinate of the sum of these points. So there's a value of k, which is kappa p here, and p, recall that p depends on the radius of the ball, because if you take a larger ball, you will have a lot of generators. If you take a smaller ball, you have a small set of generators, and the value of kappa will change accordingly. So for some values of k, this kappa p here, we know exactly that delta z d kappa p is this number. And this is the number of lattice points, of primitive points inside a cross polytope. And actually, it could be answered if we have something called primitive Erhard theory. And it turns out that we did this for the cross polytope. We found a formula for this delta z d kappa p, and we counted the number of primitive points in cross polytopes. And just after that, some months later, actually, there was a theory for primitive, an Erhard theory for primitive points that was written by Maneke and Sanyal. So it's an interesting subject, and there's a lot to do, but here we're only interested in cross polytopes for the simple reason that cross polytopes are the right object to maximize the diameter of lattice zonotopes. So let me, I speak a lot, and it's already 15h30, so I will do it quickly, but I want to give you an idea of how it works. Let me plug my computer. Yeah, so that I don't get disconnected. Okay, so I want to count the number of primitive points in my cross polytope, but you can observe already that this number of I want to count half of it, so I have a half coefficient here, but I can decompose this number into the number of primitive points in the sphere of radius I for the L1 norm, so the boundary of a cross polytope of radius I, when I goes to 1 from 1 to p. So I I just draw this process here. So you have several cross polytopes of increasing sizes, and you look at the number of primitive points in the boundary of these cross polytopes. And that's a way to express the number, the number of generators we are looking for. You can do the same for kappa p, except that here, each time you add a generator of L1 norm I, then you increase the sum of the coordinate of the sum of the generators by I. So you just have to put an I here, and at the end, the sum of all generators is a vector with all coordinates equal. So you just have to divide by D to obtain kappa p. So now, if you do this very simple geometric observation, what you're left with is to compute this number of primitive points in the boundary of a cross polytop of radius I. And in turn, so the cross polytop is a very well-known polytop. So and its face lattice is very well known as well. All the faces are simplices of some dimension. So you can decompose this number into the number of primitive points in each of the faces of the cross polytop, and you get this formula. It's a very so here 2 to the g d choose g, you recognize the f vector of the cross polytop, and C psi is the number of primitive points. Oh well, I can't highlight, but C psi is the number of primitive points in a face of dimension j of a cross polytop of radius I. In other words, it's the number of ways to write I into the sum of j relatively prime integers. So it's this kind of objects, this kind of numbers are very well known to combinatorists. Actually, a combinatorist would call this an integer composition. It's the number of ways to write an integer as a sum of smaller integer. And to our surprise, combinatorists never, well, we didn't find a source for this C psi. Nobody, or maybe somebody, but we didn't find a source, gave a formula for C psi of ij. So either this computation is really too hard or we're lucky. And it turns out we were lucky. Because we could express C psi in a very simple manner. It's basically a sum of terms that are the product of the Stirling numbers of the first kind and a Jordan-Toschen function. Jordan-Toschen function is a generalization of Euler's-Toschen function, which is better known, but it's a straightforward generalization. And there is an explicit formula. You can compute it very easily. Even though the product here ranges over prime numbers, it's very easy to compute. There's nothing complicated. And the Stirling numbers of the first kind can be computed also very easily with a recursive formula, very simple one. So if you put everything together, then you get a formula for delta z dk, this formula, which is not so horrible, considering the fact that maybe conjecturally it's the largest possible diameter of a primitive polytop contained in this hypercube. So here k is equal to kappa p, of course. And we also have the expression for kappa p. So we know the value, we know a formula for delta z dk for some particular values of k, the values of kappa 1, kappa 2, kappa 3, and so on. But in between kappa p minus 1 and kappa p, what happens? Because kappa p minus 1 and kappa p are not consecutive integers. So if I take k between kappa p minus 1 and kappa p, what happens? And it turns out that we were also able to answer this question, and the answer might be a little bit surprising. So here, look at this chart where I put the point kappa p minus 1 delta z of d kappa p minus 1 and the point kappa p delta z d kappa p. What happens in between? What is this curve? Of course, it's a discrete curve because we're in the integers. And at first, with Antoine, we had the feeling that the right behavior here between these 2 points was the linear interpolation, a discretized linear interpolation. So the floor function of the linear interpolation between these 2 points. And it turns out, which is very interesting, that we were somehow right, we were very, very right, but also a little wrong. And it made the proof interesting, and it made the result very interesting as well. But the proof is kind of technical, so I will just avoid you to see that. But you can read the paper if you want. And the answer is in this slide. So here, we take a k between kappa p minus 1 and kappa p. And we call lambda decay the linear interpolation between the 2 points. So it's a very simple formula, like this. And the theorem says that delta z decay is equal to the floor function of lambda decay, except on a subset of exceptions. So for some values of k, which are very well identified points in the integers, it's not true. But for most values of k, it's true. And the exceptions are very few, meaning that the density of the exceptions in the integer quickly go to 0 when k goes to infinity. There are very few exceptions. Moreover, and the exceptions, we have a complete characterization of them in all dimensions. It's kind of technical, so I won't tell you which, but we have a complete characterization of these numbers. And in addition, if you're in the set of exceptions, we also know the value of delta z decay. So if k is equal to this set E, delta z decay is the floor function of lambda decay minus 1. So you have 2 parallel lines. You have the linear interpolation, discretized, and you have the parallel line, which is just 1 below. And all the value of delta z decay are mostly on the first line, and sometimes, but rarely, on the other ones. Okay, so, and I will stop here.